This video will focus on chapter 22, which deals with the cross-cultural interactions within Afro-Eurasia. The motives for long-distance trade were primarily for long-distance trade were for obviously trade, diplomacy, and missionary activity. You had the Silk Roads delivering luxury goods, and the Indian Ocean basin sea lands dealing with bulk commodities like steel, stone, and building materials. The trans-Saharan routes drew West Africa into the larger economy of the Eastern Hemisphere, as well as the development of trading cities. Nomadic invasions did cause local devastation, but they also expanded the trade network as well. One of the most important long-distance travelers was Marco Polo. He traveled China with his merchant father and uncle, entered the service of the Mongol Kublai Khan. He left for Venice after 17 years in China, and while captured while in the crossfire of the Venice-Genoa conflict, his experiences are recorded by a fellow prisoner in jail. His book writings have a great influence on European engagement in the Far East, as now the Europeans are fascinated with the exoticism of a faraway land. Another important explorer was long-distance travel was Ibn Battuta, who lived from 1304 was Ibn Battuta. He was an Islamic diplomat and legal scholar working in governments during extensive travel. His reasons for travel beyond the Hajj were he was welcome as an Islamic judge in many Muslim kingdoms. There are new maritime technologies that facilitate his travel. He was able to take advantage of existing trade routes, and the fact that the Mongol kingdom provided safe passage for merchants and travelers. So this is a map depicting the travels of Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo. As we can see, Marco Polo starts in Europe, then makes his way, east into China and India, and so on. Ibn Battuta starting in Africa and moving on from there. So obviously very extensive travels. And as we can see, here's the Mongol Empire, which allows the safe travel for both people. Such long distance trade requires diplomatic relations after 1000 CE. Mongols and Christians recognized Muslims as a common enemy in the 13th century. Pope Innocent IV invites Mongols to convert to Christianity. The Mongols counteroffer in their characteristic way of Christians must accept Mongol rule or face destruction. The Mongols later try to send Raban to try to form an alliance. However, the alliance ends when the Mongol Ilkhan converted to Islam. Sufi missionaries traveled throughout the new Muslim territories from 1000 to 1500 CE. Christian missionaries would come later, accompanying the Crusades. Roman Catholic priests travel east to serve European communities, with one John of Montecorvino traveling all the way to China in 1291. He translates biblical texts into Christian and builds churches. You also had some cultural songs and stories were also exchanged along these routes. For example, the troubadours. European scientists consulted with Muslim and Jewish counterparts in understanding parts of the natural world. You also had an agriculture and technological diffusion. For example, the magnetic compass from China allowed mariners to sail over long stretches. Crops also spread, such as citrus fruits, Asian rice and cotton, sugarcane, with the Muslims introducing crystallized sugar to Europeans who liked it a lot better than honey. Demand increases very rapidly, and Europeans use Muslim precedent of having large populations of slave work on sugarcane plantations. Muslims and the Mongols spread gunpowder technologies from China. This technology reaches Europe by 1258, with the first military use being mainly bombs lobbed by catapults into cities under siege. There's a medieval warming period from 1000 to 1300 CE. This enabled the Vikings to settle Greenland. However, this was followed by the Little Ice Age from 1300 to 1800 CE. This led to a decline of agricultural output and widespread famine, as well as the drying out of the Middle East. And so this is a graph of the temperature anomalies throughout the Common Era. This is, as you can see, this is the medieval warming period, and then we get a Little Ice Age. And then also you get this huge spike with carbon with the Industrial Revolution and global warming. the Mongols and Mongols merchants and travelers spread disease west from Central Asia. The major killer disease being bubonic plague. This disease was carried by bacillus on fleas on rodents. It reaches southwest China in 1341, and then the Black Sea ports in 1346, and the Mediterranean ports in 1347. It hits Western Europe in 1348. However, there's very little of it in India and completely bypasses sub-Saharan Africa. As you can see, this disease caused a major population decline, with the populations of both China and Europe declining from 1300 CE to 1400, before finally recovering by 1500. This massive die-off from this disease caused a decline in trade, a decline in population, and a massive labor shortage. As a result, peasant workers began demanding more rights and higher wages. They also try to move from one place to another in order to get better wages. Governments try to freeze wages, clamp down on this by freezing wages and stopping serf movements, but it doesn't work, with riots happening as a result. The Yuan dynasty collapses in 1368 partially due to the plague, partly due to Mongol mismanagement, and the Mongols depart and leave China in a state of both demographic and political turmoil. An impoverished orphan raised by Buddhist monks works for the military ranks and becomes emperor. He proclaims a new Chinese Ming, or brilliant dynasty, that would last from 1368 to 1644. The Ming re-established Confucian educational and civil service systems. They also centralized authority more tightly than ever before in China. For example, you had the execution of a minister suspected of treason, which then begins a tradition of direct rule by the emperor. There's a heavy reliance on eunuchs and mandarins, and the centralized structure lasts for the Qing dynasty to 1911. The economy begins to repair thanks to constructed labor, which repaired and rebuilt irrigation systems. The Ming dynasty also promoted manufacturing of porcelain, silk, and cotton, as well as a cultural revival. They also attempted to eradicate Mongol legacy by promoting traditional Chinese culture. For example, Emperor Yongle commissions a 20,000-rule encyclopedia of history, philosophy, and literature. Now, in Western Europe, with the states that wanted the centralists had to overcome some challenges. For example, internal problems as well as plague complicating political affairs. And as well, you also had the Holy Roman Empire surviving in name, but their effective authority laying with the German princes and Italian city-states. The kings of France and England sparred over land in the 100 Years' War lasting until 1453. The Mongols continued to exact tribute from Russia for almost 250 years. Italy was one of the first states to start building state. The Italian city-states were the first to start trying to consolidate rule of direct taxes and long-term bonds. However, Italy would still continue to be disunited until 1871. France had direct sales taxes based primarily on hearths and property. England directly taxed hearths and plough teams. Centralized states also established large standing armies with gunpowder weaponry. For example, French Louis XI had an army of 15,000 troops. The nobles simply couldn't keep up because they couldn't afford the resources to hire such a giant force. In Spain, you had Fernando of Aragon marrying Isabel of Castile in 1469. This forms a major political and economic alliance. They complete the Reconquista, or the expulsion of all the Muslims in Spain, eventually expanding beyond the Iberian Peninsula to Italy. They also funded the couple also funded Columbus's quest for a modern route to China. In the Renaissance, you had a rebirth round of artistic and intellectual creativity that reflected the continuing development of a sophisticated urban society. It drew inspiration from classical/realistic Greek and Roman artists rather than their medieval predecessors. Artists studied the human form and respected the emotions of their subjects. They also used linear perspective, making art 3D and more realistic. Their architecture had the first dome buildings since antiquity, with many of them trying to imitate the Pantheon. The Renaissance was centered in Italy in the 1400s, with artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, and Brunelleschi. However, you could also argue that it could have started with Dante's Divine Comedy around in 1300-ish, lasting to the death of Michelangelo in 1564-ish. Now, fun fact: Shakespeare was also born in 1564, and he was actually still part of the Northern Renaissance. The humanists looked to classical rather than medieval scholastic literary models to update moral thought. Their focus was primarily on the humanities, literature, history, and moral philosophy. Renaissance humanists, however, were deeply devoted to Christianity versus secular humanists of today. An example was Erasmus, who published a greatly improved Greek-Latin edition of the New Testament. They also devoted to rediscovering classical Latin texts often ignored in monastic libraries. Humanists rejected monastic lifestyle in favor of a morally virtuous life while still engaged with the natural world. Basically, the lay life was okay, dealing primarily with marriage, business relationships, and public affairs. They sought to reconcile Christianity with a rapidly changing, prospering, and urbanizing European society and economy. Artists began to express interest in Byzantine and Asian worlds. Pico even tries to reconcile Plato, Aristotle, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Zoroastrianism. There's a burning desire of many European scholars to understand the larger world. The Ming dynasty is hesitant to have large foreign populations, no thanks to the Mongols, but they did allow small populations in fort cities. Trade was placed under imperial control. A Muslim eunuch by the name of Amal Zhang He mounted 7 massive naval expeditions from 1405 to 1443 to demonstrate the strength of the Ming dynasty. He was successful, but it was aborted as Mongols presented new threats in the north. And this is a picture depicting Zhang He's a ship from Zhang He's fleet compared to one of ships from Columbus' fleet. As we can see, the Ming ships were humongous and massive, and if the emperor hadn't decided to draw inward, his dynasty probably could have engaged in some world domination. Wouldn't that been fun? European exploration in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans were primarily for profit and missionary activity, or aka gold, God, and glory. Portuguese were the early leaders in Atlantic exploration, with thanks to their long years of experience of fishing experience in the Atlantic. Prince Henry the Navigator was an active sponsor, searching for a sea route to the Indian Ocean basin. There was also exploration of the West African coast, with trading for gold. The Portuguese also discovered and colonized a number of Atlantic islands. The Portuguese invested in the sugarcane plantations aided by the Italians. This dramatically increases the volume of the slave trade, and these African islands become test markets for future colonies like Brazil, and etc. Ultimately, some 12 million Africans were deported to the Americas for slave labor. West Africans attempt to avoid using Muslim and Italian middlemen in trade with the East. In 1488, Diaz sails around the Cape of Good Hope. From 1497 to 1499, Vasco da Gama sails this route to India and back. Portuguese gunships attained to maintain the trade monopoly, and this marks the beginnings of European imperialism in Asia. Christopher Columbus tries to look for a western sea route to the Indian Ocean. The Portuguese considers proposal impractical and rejected. However, Fernando and Isabel of Spain decide to fund his voyage, with Columbus departing in 1492. He makes landfall in San Salvador. However, he believes he had reached the islands off the coast of Asia. So this is a map of some of the major voyages. For example, Zhang He, exploring mostly Asia. Da Gama, like Diaz, going down along the African coast. Da Gama sailing past the Cape of Good Hope to India, Columbus reaching the Americas. And that is all. Thank you.